Everyone hear me okay? Is the audio okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, so welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this quick talk about accessibility and how we can build or how we should build better things with accessibility. I'm going to cover a few slides around just logistics before we kick off. So first of all, a quick agenda of what I aim to cover today. Just a really short history of web accessibility, how it came to be and why. Looking through a couple of techniques you can use, one of which I found really useful in my career, the accessibility lenses. A quick mention of some legal implications that you could face if you're not doing things right. And then in the end, I'm going to cover a few testing tools, which are mainly free and have helped me and I think a lot of other people throughout their career to be more accessible and inclusive. And at the end, we will have some time for questions. As we go through the talk, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. And then at the end, we will address them. We will answer them. Hopefully, all of them will be answered. A quick introduction for myself. My name is Norbert. I'm a senior product developer and speed skater at N Digital. We all have N titles. So mine is speed skater, which relates to my unfortunately previous life because I had to stop speed skating due to an injury. But I do feel that it kind of translates a little bit into work, being like a sprinter in speed skating and then doing sprints in agile throughout my career. I'm, as I said, a developer with a focus on front end. So JavaScript, CSS, everything UI related, as well as I'm doing a lot of UI design lately. And I like to think of myself as an accessibility advocate. So basically that one person who joins the project and starts annoying everyone with questions around contrast and font sizes, which not everyone likes. There's my contact information if you do want to get in touch. So feel free to do that. A few things around N Digital, what we are and what we do. So the first thing is we do have open jobs all of the time. We have clubs across the UK, so starting from south around London, going up to Leeds, Halifax, Manchester as well. And there's a good variety of jobs available. So analysts, developers, squad leads, even UX designers, specialists and consultants. So there's a good pick here. And if you see that any of these roles could be a good fit for you, feel free to either scan the QR code or click the link that's on this slide. The slides will be shared with you after the talk as well. What we do is, as you see, we accelerate the development of world-class digital capabilities. So it's a consultancy, but a different take on it. We don't go in and build a product and then walk away. The goal here is to come to a client to assess what they want to build, whether it's something they already have that has to be improved. But we don't only just build it on our own. We work together with their team. We upskill their team. We upskill ourselves as well if we need to deliver the best possible maintainable piece of functionality so that when we walk away, the client can carry on and maintain or further develop that platform. We work in kind of these three different batches, which means we do guide, build, and teach. Build is the main area that we do, so building digital products. But we also offer guide, which is our consultants who would come in, assess a client environment and use their expertise to offer, ways for improvement. And then the teach is also a really big part of the end culture, which means we can offer upskilling for our clients, developers, analysts. We can also upskill people internally. And there's also a nice way to upskill ourselves as well. Okay, so one more thing, sorry, is this event is going to be recorded. So if you don't feel comfortable having your camera on, feel free to just turn it off. Photography is not really gonna happen today since we are online. So with all of that covered, I'm gonna move in slowly to the first section. Just one final note is just please keep like a positive and safe environment throughout. With messages in the chat, just be mindful of others, make sure that everyone feels inclusive and we are all friendly. And then without any further ado, I'm going to start with a brief history of web accessibility. In order to cover this, we need to go a little bit back, and actually quite far back, believe it or not. We need to go back all the way to 1989. 1989 is the year of the invention of the World Wide Web by no other than Tim Berners-Lee. His idea for the initial World Wide Web was a little bit different than what it is today, but kind of the same. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because it was meant to be used by a subset of people, by scientists at CERN, but the core functionality was supposed to be sharing information, instant access to information around the world to advance science or their research. So that's where the kind of the same comes in. So the sharing of the information is the same use case that we use it for today. We can see that the web has developed pretty quickly in just short 4 or 5 years. It went from prototype, from being one static server at CERN, which had a big red label on it saying, do not turn off because this is a server, to serving more than 10 million people around the world by 94, having 10,000 servers, and the amount of information shared by that time was equal to the entire published work of Shakespeare every single second. Obviously, that's a couple of orders of magnitude more today. But what happens after 94 is the interesting thing. We have something that I like to refer to as the dark ages of the web. We have technologies like HTML evolving enough to allow you to structure your page. We have CSS1 published, which allows you to change colors, font sizes, color of text, background color. So you have some options, but with the addition of HTML adding features like images and videos, you get a blend of features which allow you to manipulate what you show on a screen in a way that, without standards, can get out of control quite quickly. At the same time, we have the battle of the browsers. We have the old Mosaic browser, but we also have Netscape and Internet Explorer coming into the game. So all in all, this is a really confusing time. It's a confusing time of no standards, no rules to follow around color, around font sizes, and also incompatible browsers because none of them were compatible with each other, which means your website looked absolutely different in every one of them. And it's not until 96 that we have the first draft of the Web Accessibility Initiative. It also took 9 months for that draft to become officially published in 97. And 97 is an important year because the Web Accessibility Initiative was published, it was available, it also came together with a couple of automated testing tools already in 97, like Bobby and Wave. I do suggest you read up on Bobby and Wave and how they aim to solve this in the beginning, but I'm not going to deep dive into those today. The main bit that I wanted to point out here was to say that web accessibility is not the new kid on the block. It's not something that we just woke up a couple of days ago and said, oh, we need to now do this. Web accessibility was around right from the beginning. It pretty much evolved with the web as it was created. So the question that I'm asking is, why now, more than 20 years later, we are still neglecting this aspect of web development? We are still ignoring it widely. And I think that it's because throughout these years, with technology evolving, a couple of myths, a couple of misconceptions have formed around how difficult accessibility could be, or how important it is, or how not important it is in some people's opinion. So what I tend to do is address these one by one, and as I'm going through them, show a couple of things how we can be more inclusive on our day-to-day basis. One thing that I think is useful to define is what does accessibility mean in the web space? If we think about it in the physical world, the first thing that comes into mind about accessibility is a wheelchair user. And the reason for this is because they need a different or alternative way to access features in the physical world. And it's really similar on the web as well. I'm sure you can find a really long, probably 3-page long definition of what accessibility is in the web space. But it boils down to this one sentence for me, which is giving users with disabilities or impairments alternative ways to access our content. And I usually like to trim this down a little bit more to this, just giving users alternative ways to access content. It's really for everyone, not just, it's going to affect a lot more people than you can think. And this is going to become a little bit more clear as we move on, as I'm trying to explain what an impairment can mean for a user on the web. So there are these cases when, from my experience, I'm joining a new client, I'm joining a new project. It doesn't matter. It can be in the automotive, in the retail, finances, or any other area. I'm met with this kind of answer when I'm asking about accessibility. People usually tell me accessible sites only benefit a small number of people. Or the different kind of answer to this could be, people with accessible needs don't really use my website. And to me, this sounds like someone is constructing a building. They decide to put a restaurant at the top floor, but they say we don't need an elevator because wheelchair users just won't come to dine here. First of all, you can't know that. And second of all, if you had an elevator, wouldn't that actually benefit every single person visiting your restaurant? So I don't think it's fair to say that it's a really small number of people for any sort of web-based product. And the reason is because around the world, worldwide the population, at least 15% of people will experience some sort of disability throughout their life that will affect how they can use the internet. So that number, really rounded down, comes into about 1 billion people. And it's called the World Wide Web for a reason, and we should, no matter what, be really inclusive and think about everyone. Another thing to expand on that 1 billion is when we start to think what a disability or an impairment can mean for the users of the web. And there's loads of categories, but I like to point these three out, one, because you can drill into every one of them with subcategories, but these three, I think, cover nicely the most things you need to think about. If you think about a person with a permanent disability, this can be a person who is missing a limb and they cannot use a mouse and a keyboard together, so they need to opt for one. It can be a person who has a permanent visual impairment or hearing impairment. But then when we move into temporary impairments, we can match probably all of the permanent cases in a slightly different way. Instead of missing a limb, you can have someone with a broken arm or a broken wrist, which doesn't give them the option to use the mouse as they're used to. Or it can be just a person who has some sort of an injury that temporarily blocks their vision. So they need to use the web in a different way. But the more interesting sector for me is the situational one, especially because for the last 6 months, I got to experience these myself. And I can assure you that trying to use the web while holding a baby is definitely not easy. Some sites offer you a better experience, some offer you a worse one. But I have a much better case that I think is much more relatable to everyone. If you imagine being in a coffee shop with your laptop, you're trying to watch a video and on some website, and it doesn't have subtitles, it doesn't have a transcript, so you're relying on being able to hear it. And imagine you forgot your headphones, or your headphones simply ran out of battery, and the coffee shop is super loud because it's super busy, and there is absolutely no way for you to consume the content of that video because you just can't hear it, you can't understand it. So when we think about all of these cases together, that number of 1 billion tends to grow a lot bigger. So no, it's definitely not a small number of people who will benefit from accessible design. And another thing is, we just need to think about it. It's literally going to be every single person will benefit from accessible design, just like we can all benefit from accessible features in the physical world. Whether it's a person who is outside in a really strong sunlight and they need better contrast on their screen, whether it's a person in a loud environment without headphones, everyone will literally benefit from it. Another thing that I am faced with is, even if you manage to convince people that accessibility is not benefiting a small number of people and we should address it, usually people will come back and say, you know what, yes, we understand, we will do that, but can we just get the product through the door? We'll come back to it, we'll do accessibility later on. So that brings this saying which says it's easy to treat accessibility as an afterthought. I'm not saying it's not possible to treat it as an afterthought. I'm just saying that it's probably the wrong way around. I'm going to expand on this in one of the further sections, but right now what I want to say is that it really starts from design. And there's this really good book that I can recommend you to read, which is The Art of Game Design. It's called The Book of Lenses. I know it says game design, but thinking about websites today, I can kind of see a website as a really, simple game. You need to click a specific combination of buttons to get to your reward, and your reward in this case is good information. So a quote from this book says this: good accessible design happens when you view your design from many different perspectives or lenses. Thinking about what could these lenses be when it comes to web design or accessible web design, I curated a list that I think is the most relevant and will give you a good enough approach to cover all bases of accessibility. Obviously, you don't need to cover all of these on every single project, but it's a good list to go through and try to ask yourself some questions. From this list, we have the 4 that are highlighted at the moment are the ones that we tend to think about pretty much because we are visual as we are designing and developing. So the lens of color is like, is there enough contrast? Is this color strong enough against the background so that I can see it, I can read it? Images and icons, do the images and icons go together with my content? Are they giving enough context? And then it's also like giving some alternative text, which is something that we tend to remember. We don't necessarily do it in the right way, but we can talk about that a bit more. Then we have the lens of readability, structure and layout. And this one is pretty simple for people to address because this is just making sense of the flow of your website, whether it reads correctly, whether the flow of the information goes from top to bottom and it's easy to follow through. One thing that people tend to ignore is that some users with accessible needs will turn off CSS and they will try to access a black and white website, meaning that your structure could actually be gone at that point. So it's important to remember to check these. Now, the ones that we tend to ignore most of the time is the lens of controls. It's about making sure that every piece of content and every single page of your website can be reached by other means, not just by a mouse. But if someone can only use a keyboard or any sort of proprietary mechanism that doesn't allow them to move on the page with a cursor. We have audio and video, which I already mentioned in my previous example for, let's say, the loud environment. And then we have the lens of time, which is probably something that we don't usually think about. But if you're building some sort of a service that needs to be completed in a timely manner, you have a form that has a limited time of 20 minutes to be completed because of a session or a strict session, or because there's a queue of people waiting. What if someone just cannot complete this in 20 minutes because their dexterity is just not good enough for them to move that fast? You need to provide them with a way to reach out to you, to request a different form, which does not give them the constraint, because if you want to be inclusive, you will need to do things like this. Now, the last one in this list, because we don't have time to deep dive in all of them, the last one I left was animation and effects. The reason I left this one is because I want to address this one, which can potentially even be dangerous. And it doesn't matter which of these lenses you're diving into, it's always about asking the right questions. It's about looking at animation and effects and asking yourself, are there any effects that could actually cause a seizure to someone? Is there any effect that can cause like dizziness or vertigo through the use of motion? And then it's also important to think about, is it possible to provide controls for any of this, and it doesn't all only relate to animations and effects, it relates to audio and video as well. Because here we are going into the lens of control to allow them to pause the animation if it's distracting to them. Now in the next slide, I'm going to show an animation that is an example of something that a designer or someone can think like, oh, this is amazing, it looks really good, I love it, but actually it can be quite dangerous. So if any of you are sensitive to motion and can experience dizziness, please look away. I am going to let you know when I move on from that slide. So I'm going to click through now, and we're going to review this. So this slide showcases an animation with multiple movements. We see a zooming movement, we see text sliding in, and even if you look at this, like even for myself, I'm not really prone to dizziness, but looking at this for a longer time, it does start to get a little bit confusing. And these are the things that you need to watch out for. That it could look great, it could look amazing, but is it actually safe? Because this can cause problems to someone who has issues with this. So I'm moving away from this slide now, so people who had to move away can look back. The other thing that I want to address is whether accessibility is optional. In a lot of cases, someone would think, oh, it's optional, so we don't really have to do it for our use case. And I think in some cases, you can actually get into a little bit of trouble with the law if you're in a country that actually adopted high standards of accessibility. And believe it or not, there's a lot of countries that have adopted this. So the truth is that if your website or web-based product is a service in any of these sectors, so public, private, or voluntary sector, there is a high possibility that there is a legal requirement behind you meeting at least the minimal accessibility needs. So I do challenge everyone to, when you go into your next project, to ask yourself this question. Is this a service, and is it in any of these sectors? And I find it highly unlikely that you won't fit into any of these categories. So there is a nice map that you can look at to get a nice overview of where accessibility is actually required. So everything that you see here in this crimson color are the countries where the highest possible level of web accessibility guidelines is adopted. So 2.0, which are slightly more strict than 1.0, and they do require you to actually make sure that the content is not just accessible, but that it also makes sense when it's navigatable by keyboard, or when it's read without, let's say, seeing the screen. The pink areas are countries where you have a recommendation to do it, but you don't have to. And then we have the dark gray ones where 1.0 is required. And it's not to say that you can get out easy. 1.0 is still something that you need to address to build a better website. You could ask Netflix about accessibility requirements as well, because back in 2011, Netflix was the first company on the receiving end of a lawsuit, which was accessibility related. The lawsuit was filed by the National Association of the Deaf. And back then, I don't know if many of you remember, but Netflix started streaming videos on their web platform. However, the videos did not have subtitles, meaning that people were discriminated against. And in the US, there was the act of discrimination, which actually allowed them to file a lawsuit. And this cost them about $750,000. So although these cases are not really common, and this is one of the biggest big companies involved in a lawsuit that I could find, it's just to showcase that, yes, you could have legal implications. Now, there is this other thing that, from some strange idea, people tend to think that accessibility is super difficult and scary. The reason why I want to address this misconception is because this is the one that will put developers themselves off from doing that conscious effort to being more inclusive, or to look into what it takes to make an accessible website. And it's funny, there are different ways to explain, like technically, why this isn't true. But a couple of years back, I attended an accessibility meeting or meetup where something was mentioned in a room that resonated with me. So I wrote this down, and I'm going to share that with you right now. So it says that far from being something that you need to add to your site, accessibility is something we need to ensure isn't removed. And when this was said, pretty much the whole meeting had this reaction. We were starting to think, well, what does this person mean by that? What's happening? But the more I started to think about it, I started to realize that if you actually write, standards, conformance, and semantic code, like if you're thinking about HTML here, if you just use HTML as it was intended to be used, you get a lot of accessibility support straight out of the box. Today we have HTML5, which is a huge upgrade from HTML4. HTML4 had a couple of drawbacks and mistakes. So HTML5 not just fixed them, but went a step further to provide us with native elements for pretty much every single use case we can think of. But the issue is that today we are not building websites as we used to before. Before we used to build websites top to bottom as a one page, and we had the context of the entire page. Right now we are building web components in isolation. So when someone says, build me a custom web component, it's easy for a developer to go and say, amazing, I can build everything from scratch. And forget that you can just go off to HTML5 docs, search for the use case that you're using. If you're building a form-based component, you have all the form elements. If you're building a date picker or anything, all of these elements already exist, and they come with accessibility built into them. It's only when we decide to go against the grain of the web and use custom user experience to build something custom, in most cases because we enjoy it, but we forget to think about what is already there, and what's already there has been developed in a way that it is already accessible. So keep that in mind when you build something new or when you build something custom. The truth is that exactly the same technologies are used. You just have to be more thoughtful. You have to be do this with more understanding and attention to detail. So go back to the basics, understand the basics of the markup, and then apply your use case on it. And you will see that actually accessibility is not something that needs to be added as an extra. In some cases, of course, it could be, but this is probably 80% of the cases, and this will get you to the AA accessibility, that is the minimal requirement. The final piece is around testing, and in a lot of cases, it's kind of the understanding that you can just do testing without consulting assistive technologies or users with disabilities. And this is the point where I tend to disagree the most, because you can even do as much testing as you want using assistive technologies, but nothing is going to replace an actual user with a disability giving you that proper feedback of why they find something difficult. And in most cases, from my experience, if you reach out to, there are groups you can reach out, they will be more than happy to offer to test your website and give you proper feedback around it. But in most cases, using assistive technologies can help you a lot. It can help you get to a good point. So what I want to do is I want to cover a few things that you can actually use completely for free, and they do a really good job of setting you up for success. One of them is, I believe, something that we all use on our day-to-day, which is the Chrome browser. The Chrome browser comes with Lighthouse built in the developer tools. Here you can run audits, not for just accessibility. You can run audits for lots of other things like performance and best practices. Lighthouse can run in your browser. It can run in your pipeline. It can run in your on-demand environments and really quickly give you feedback about your accessibility level dropping. It's going to give you a nice list of the audits you passed. It's going to also give you a list and suggestions of the ones you didn't pass. It will pinpoint which element that is, how to fix it, tell you how to achieve it. So it's an amazing tool, and it's absolutely free, and it's well tested. So it really does a good job. There are also really good browser extensions. They do tend to have free versions and then paid versions, or maybe just versions where you can donate a little bit to support them. You might remember at the beginning I mentioned Wave, which was one of the first automated evaluation tools. It's still being developed and maintained today, and it's one of the probably top ones of my choice. Then we have Web Disability Simulator and No Coffee. They're really interesting. They will give you the ability to see your screen as someone with a visual impairment. So whether it's a person who just really has limited vision, or whether it's a person that doesn't see colors the way we do, when you start going through these lenses, it's going to change your mindset. You're going to start to understand how important a simple thing like contrast or font size can be. And the final one is Storybook. I'm pretty sure most of you, if you're developers or analysts, you have heard of Storybook, because Storybook is quite widely used. It's completely free, and it fits today's development process perfectly, because as I mentioned, we're building components, componentized pieces of our website, and Storybook will allow us to start up all of our components in isolation. So you don't have to wait until they're all in one page to notice that something is wrong. You can actually start it up, go through every single component you have, click through it, go through the states of your component as well, because it's interactive, and it will show you whether a button in its certain state doesn't have enough contrast, or whether you have to change some of the colors that you have in the component, because obviously our components are also stylable. So this will give us a nice overview. And again, absolutely free, and it's a great tool. And it can be even hosted for free. If you use anything like GitHub or GitLab, you can just use GitHub Pages to host this, and everyone can have access to review it. So those are the quick tools that I wanted to cover today. Obviously, I could talk about this a lot more, but I didn't want to go into technical. I just wanted to give you a couple of things that I use on my day-to-day basis and that help me, and hopefully they will help you as well. Or you can go out and inspire some other people who could use them. The final bit that I want to point out here is, if we think about the elderly people today, like they really struggle to use the web. I can imagine any of you were trying to explain to your grandma or grandpa how to use the web. But what is the difference between them and us? The difference is that they have actually grew up, learned in a way that they didn't rely on the web. So they learned how to live without it. And I don't think we can say that about any of us. We all rely on instant access of the web. We all grew up with that, just having to look up something on the web. So thinking about, and I'm sorry to be dramatic, but we like it or not, we are all getting older. With age, our vision, our sight, our hearing, our dexterity even can diminish or change. And at the same time, that's going to change our ability to use the web. So as you're building products today, think about accessibility right from the start to build better things for tomorrow. For the final slide, I have a few resources here for you guys to look through. I used some of these to create the content of the presentation itself, but some of them I use on my day-to-day basis. The first one, the accessibility cheat sheet, a really good one. I think this is a one-pager that should be printed out on your wall next to your tech team, that they can see really quick reference what they need to pay attention to. Area, something that there's just not enough time to cover ever, because it's a huge document and it can be quite scary. But if you look at this document that I linked here, which is the area authoring practices, it's a much more lean approach to what area should be. And you can search for things like, I'm building a checkbox, how should I do it? Or I need to build a custom form, what do I need to pay attention to? And you have nice sections here pointing out every single part of the process and giving you working examples as well. And then the rest of them are just a bunch of information allowing you to get up to speed on the latest stuff. Some of them could be a bit outdated researches, but they offer a good insight into how important accessibility is. Yeah, I'm going to be open for questions now. Anything you want to ask, feel free to ask. One thing that I wanted to mention is that there will be another Elevenses series on the 5th of November, which will be with the title of The Power of Diversity in Product by James Finch. So if you are interested, please look out for that message.
Thanks, Norbert. I have a few questions that have been sent to me, if that's okay, before anybody else jumps in there. Are there any other benefits from being accessible on the web?
Yes, of course. So if you think about what does accessibility mean throughout all these slides that we went through, it means adding alternative content. It means adding descriptions to images. It means your website actually being usable on all sorts of screens. So screen sizes and orientations. So immediately, if we think about that, another thing that comes into mind is search engine optimization, because if your website is fully accessible, that means your SEO ranking is going to be through the roofs, because Google will obviously reward you for being accessible as well.
Thanks. We've had one, how would you bake accessibility thinking into design?
Baking accessibility thinking into design. Yes, so it's a bit limited what you can do in design. So you can't think really much forward to animations until you get to the stage of animating. The main thing you need to think about is choose the right lenses that can help you. So the lens of color, definitely. Lens of structure and readability. These are things that are also used in graphic design, not just web design. So these are things that can be applied on a static document as well. So I would say just try to approach everything with this mind of looking through lenses and perspectives, making sure when you're defining your brand, if you define the colors wrong, because imagine your website will have to follow the brand colors. If they're chosen in the wrong way, that means accessibility issues will affect the entire website as well. I hope that makes sense.
Other than Lighthouse, do you know of any useful CI tools?
Other than Lighthouse, I think you can even have Storybook baked into your CI, which means that it will spin up an environment for you. Lighthouse was pretty useful for me, but you have Ellie integrations, so Lighthouse has its own extension, which is called Ellie, shorthand for accessibility, which can also be baked into your CI, making it, giving you a nice snapshot of your standards being reached.
How would you recommend we get our clients more engaged with the subject of accessibility?
That's a tricky one, and it's always a challenge for me, but it's a really good question. It's about somehow showing them, first of all, be enthusiastic about it, because in today's world, being inclusive is one of the most important things. And if they see that you are enthusiastic about it, if you talk through this with passion, to give them good examples of, think about, I have a person in my family who has some sort of a visual impairment, and when I asked them to use the web, they told me it was broken. If you give them these real relatable scenarios, this will get them on board with it, because as soon as you find something relatable with people, they tend to start seeing things in a different way. And from my experience, that works really well, because after that, like years down the line, they start still messaging you to say how awesome their new website became because they were listening to your advice.
And one last one, what is the best way to add alternative content to images?
Adding alternative content to images. There's three things you need to think about adding alternative content. And let's take a simple example of your company's website. It has a logo in the top left corner, and then your accessibility audit doesn't pass because you don't have alternative text. So usually what people go and do is they say logo of the website or brand logo. So it's kind of true, but it doesn't give you anything. So what they do is they expand it, and then they try to say brand name, and then a list of keywords of services that they offer. It's better, but it's keyword versus detail. So if you're going to do something with something as simple as logo, you put down the brand name. You don't really need to explain much about it. But if you have, let's say, an educational website let's imagine a picture of a student sitting at their computer and the teacher pointing at their screen. So it's keyword versus detail. You want to say there is a teacher pointing at the screen of a student of, let's say if it's a financial a student. So that gives them more detail. But then you need to think about details and specificity. If this was an educational website, you want to provide that actual specificity of she's pointing at the tool that they're using on their computer. Imagine someone not seeing the picture. You need to describe there is two people on the screen. One of them is a teacher, one of them is a student. So you need to create it as like a story. And then the third one is thinking about specificity versus context. This is the image and all the text going around it. You need to make a connection between the image and the context around it. So give it more context, because that's how it's gonna work much better for your users.
That's great, thank you. I don't think we've got any other questions, so I think we'll wrap up. Just to let everybody know that we will be sending out the recording and the slides in the next couple of days, so you'll have access to all of those resources and all those links that Norbert has included as well. So I think just a big thank you to Norbert. Very interesting indeed, and obviously it's something you can tell that you're passionate about, so something that everybody needs to think about.
And thank you everyone for joining and sticking with me. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, everybody.
Amazing. Thank you. Bye.